Well, thanks everyone for making time for the presentation today. This is the beginning of our series of educational opportunities, kind of like leading up to the strategic planning retreat. We're going to start off with just an intro from Thomas, then I'll come back and present Hayden and the Center for Effective Philanthropy. Thomas?
Great, well, thank you, Michelle, and thanks everybody. Great to see you again. I'm going to do two things. I'm going to do them very quickly. One, I just want to re-ground us in how today's meeting and a similar meeting that we're having next week fits in and actually helps to drive the overarching strategic planning process. And then number two, I'm going to provide some very simple instructions on how to capture your thinking on what the information that you hear today really means for the foundation and what questions are coming up for you about the future work of the foundation. So with that, let me share my slides right quick. And I want to get to the meat of this thing as quickly as possible. And you've seen this slide before. We talked about this at the board meeting recently, but in its simplest form, there's three major parts of the strategic planning process. Right now, we're in that sort of information gathering and analysis phase. There's two big meetings that's going to feed that phase of the strategic planning process. One is today. We're going to hear from Hayden from the Center for Effective Philanthropy on your Grantee Preception Survey. You got a great response to that survey. There's amazing information in there. And so today's really going to be about looking at the foundation. Today's about looking inward. And then next week, we have a meeting with Midwest Evaluation, who's going to provide a bunch of information and data around the community indicators or the issues and the things that you care about externally. So today's internally, next week is externally. And then all of this information, we will turn into some beginning analysis today and next week. And then it will feed the strategic planning retreat that happens on November 4th and 5th. We'll spend that first day really looking at your analysis, not a bunch of data, but really taking a next level in taking that analysis and thinking about what it means for the future of the foundation and having some critical conversations that bubble up from these two meetings themselves. Second day of that retreat, we'll turn all that information and analysis into your next iteration of the strategic plan itself. And so here's the instructions for today. The main thing is to listen to what's being provided. There's amazing information. We've seen the preliminary report that's coming out of the survey, really amazing information from your stakeholders, one of your key constituents. And so listen to that information that's being provided. But at the same time, as you listen, think about what it means for the foundation, right? Because it's just information right now. We need y'all to turn it into actual analysis that we can use to help feed the future of the foundation's work. And so as you're listening to the information being provided, think about these three questions. And then I'm going to give you a sheet here in just a second to capture your ideas here. But what are the foundation's core strengths? And what we're looking for is those top three, right? You have 100 strengths. But what's the core three strengths that we really want to build on and actually help to accelerate the future work of the foundation? So be thinking about those as you listen to the survey report. And then what areas need attention or improvement within the foundation itself? And again, this is internally, so think only about the foundation at this point, really looking at the inside of the foundation, because your grantees are giving you some good feedback on where you might improve on some things as well. So capture those three things. And then also capture those critical questions that are coming up for you. You're going to hear a lot of information. And so what's coming up for you? What questions about your future work are actually coming up for you? And we want to capture those critical questions because we may dive into a series of those in that first retreat itself. And so let me tell you how we're going to capture those things. Catherine, could you put that chat in the link, or excuse me, the link in the chat itself? So let me stop sharing my screen here. And if you look in the chat, there's a link. And if you click on that link, it'll bring up a Google Doc. And on that Google Doc, you can see I have the same three questions there. Let me share my screen here. You can see the Google Doc here. We're asking you about the strengths, we're asking you about the needs or areas of improvement, and we're asking about those critical questions. And so you can capture your input into this document at any time, and you can take notes. As long as you keep this link, you can take notes and things, and even do your input in this document after the meeting itself if you want to do that. We'll send out this link one more time to make sure everybody has it. This is a Google Doc, so whatever you put in it, everybody can see. So you'll see other people's real-time input into this document as well. And then we will make more sense out of what comes into this document, and that's what will come into their first retreat itself. This is really around your strengths and your areas of improvement and those critical questions. And so as you're listening to the survey results, be thinking about these things, be putting in your analysis of the information that you're about to receive. You can do it real time. You can make notes and do this after the meeting itself, whatever works best for you. Let me stop there and see if you have any questions about this part, and then I'm going to turn it over to Hayden and or turn it back to Michelle and get us started in the Grantee survey report. Any questions on what we're asking you to do here? All right. Well, thanks so much. I'm excited to see what comes out of this. Back to you, Michelle.
All righty, great. And I just wanted to make sure you should have heard, and you do see on the screen now, that we are recording this meeting so that the board members who were unable to attend will be able to share the recording with them. So we are recording. I think it was 2019, we had said about, I said about looking for a grantee perception survey process instrument for us. And the Center for Effective Philanthropy kept rising to the top. I've attended their conferences, and they always have a lot of excellent information about our sector. They provide data, feedback, programs, and insights to help smaller, foundations and philanthropies of different sizes. They help us to improve our effectiveness. The Grantee Preception Report is one of the assessments that they offer. It's the gold standard in feedback in our sector. It's the only grantee survey that puts our results in a comparative context with our peers. So we partnered with CEP. We had to delay it because of COVID, but we finally got it done. And Hayden Cavillion has been our main point of contact. Hayden is the manager of assessment and advisory services. And he's been, working with Stephanie and the team and all of us to really make this Grantee Perception Report a reality. So thank you so much, Hayden, and it's all yours.
Thanks, Michelle. Sorry, I was sharing my screen right as you introduced me. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time today. I know it's always hard to kind of step back and sit back and reflect on your own internal work. That's what we were asking you to do today. And Thomas's questions tee us up perfectly for the conversation that we have coming forward and that you have coming forward as you enter into your strategic plan. I also want to give a thanks back to Michelle and Stephanie for shepherding this entire process. These surveys aren't the easiest to get into the field. There's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of questions, and a lot of information we need, and they handled all of our questions with grace and patience. So thank you both for really taking the time to make sure that this project was as successful as it could be. I'm Hayden Cavillion, a manager of assessment advisory services, and I'm joined by my colleague, Aaron Fitzgerald, who is an analyst here at CEP. I'll be walking through the majority of the presentation with you today. Aaron will take us through one section on grantees' perceptions of your relationships with them. Overall, before we really get into the data, I just want to let you know that these grantees' perceptions of TGKVF are exceptionally positive, more positive than we typically see. And we'll go through what that looks like in just a minute, but I just wanted to go ahead and peel back the cover a little bit and let you know that the ratings here that we're seeing are much more positive than what we usually see. Of course, there are always opportunities for improvement, and we'll talk about those today, but wanted to start out with the strengths. So a little bit more on CEP. So we're a nonprofit based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we use data to help funders improve their effectiveness, and we do that in a variety of ways. Through programming, like Michelle was just referring to, conferences, podcasts, where we help to bring funders together to explore and discuss best practices in philanthropy. Research, or particularly research on the field around various issues impacting the field of philanthropy and nonprofits in general. As one example, we recently published a report on the impacts of COVID-19 on nonprofits in the United States. We also have advisory services where we create customized, more bespoke projects for funders, staff interviews, grantee focus groups, customized surveys, that are more tailored to funders' specific context and needs. And then there are assessments, like this Grantee Preception Report, where funders are able to reflect on their work. And that's what we'll be talking about today. So we surveyed all active grantees from May and June of this year. We received a 65% response rate, which is right in line with what we aim for and gives us confidence of the representativeness of this data. So you can feel good about what we're sharing isn't just one or two grantee perspectives. It is a representative sample of your grantee population, of whom we all reached out to survey via an online survey. So throughout the presentation, and what Michelle was just mentioning so well, is we won't just be showing your own absolute ratings from grantees. We'll be sharing them in comparison to our overall comparative data set of more than 300 funders and more than 40,000 grantees. This comparative data set helps control for the inherent positivity that exists between a funder and a grantee. So we're able to understand a foundation's own distinct strengths and opportunities compared to its peers. Of course, not every funder is going to be exactly like TGKVF. And so for that reason, there's a smaller custom cohort that Candace, Stephanie, and all help select that more closely resembles the community foundation along various communication scale, scope, assets, target areas, as well as a few aspirational funders as well. And I want to say, before we enter into the data, it's important to note that this survey, it's over 60 measures. I won't be sharing all of those with you today, but nonetheless, it's important for you to interpret this data in light of the foundation's own goals, context, and strategy. Not every measure is going to be important to the foundation, nor should it be. So it's important to think about what are priorities for the foundation and what isn't as important. And I also want to recognize that this is just a snapshot in time. It's one of many ways that staff and you as a board are receiving feedback from your grantees. So it's no more and no less than just that, a survey that occurred in the spring of this year. So with that, are there any questions on the survey methodology or the timing of the survey before we move into the results? And I can't see all the faces, so please don't hesitate to type up. All right, let's move on. Let's dive right into the data. Grantees' perceptions of the impact that the foundation is having on their communities. Let me orient you to our charts. This is what you're going to be seeing throughout the presentation. This represents our comparative data set for this question. Overall, how would you rate the foundation's impact on your local community? This is the exact question that grantees saw, and they saw it on a 1 to 7 scale, where 1 is no impact and 7 is significant positive impact. So this wide orange bar represents the range of responses of those more than 300 foundations in our data set. So on the far left-hand side is the lowest rated funder for this measure. They received a 2.58. The far right-hand side is the highest rated funder for this measure, receiving a 6.69. Meanwhile, in the middle is the median funder, what we'll often refer to as the typical funder, and they're receiving a 5.71. The foundation's own rating is in that white flag, a 6.43 in the 95th percentile. Just below that wide orange bar is a custom cohort, that smaller group of funders I was just alluding to. What's interesting and what you should pay attention to throughout the presentation is actually how this custom cohort shifts. The median of the custom cohort is much higher than the median of the overall data set here. And you can note that by the blue tick mark that's in the just above the 75th percentile of the overall data set. Are there any questions here and how to interpret or read this chart before we move on? Anything I can explain further. There's really no reason you have ever seen one of these charts before, so if it's confusing, don't hesitate to shout. I'll tell you, silence is a great thing. So what do we see? Grantees' perceptions of the impact that the foundation is having on the community are exceptionally positive in the top 5% of our comparative data set, higher than most other funders that we work with. This is a rating to be proud of and to celebrate, and something we'll talk about in a bit, which is what is the foundation doing that is contributing to these exceptionally positive ratings? This question is particularly important as you go into a strategic plan to make sure you're codifying different aspects of value, culture, and behaviors that are leading to such strong perceptions. And I want to share too that it's not just quantitative findings, not just grantees' ratings where we're seeing these strong perceptions. It's in grantees' own open-ended written comments as well. So here's one grantee saying that the foundation has made so many dreams come true by showing what a good leader is. And this isn't a one-off comment. It's a representative comment from a host of grantees that we received who responded to the survey. And this impact comes in line with as well grantees' perceptions of the foundation's understanding of their work, in particular the community. Here again, we're seeing a rating that's in the top 5% of our comparative data set and towards the top of the custom cohort. And that understanding extends not just to this broad idea of community, but also to those that grantees are seeking to serve, their beneficiaries. Here, grantees are providing a rating in the top 20% of the comparative data set, and again, towards the top of the custom cohort. Here are a few more grantee quotes that illustrate these findings. They have a unique presence. They build on community strengths and are community driven. The foundation is a good connector among resources in the community. The program officer specifically is well equipped to bring influential people into a room together. And one piece of the foundation's work that is is also important are these ideas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So in the survey, we asked a question about whether or not grantees agreed with these 4 separate statements on DEI. Overwhelmingly, and more strongly than typical, grantees agree that most staff that they have interacted with at the foundation embody a strong commitment to DEI and that the foundation is committed to combating racism. You can see the median funder here for the foundation is committed to combating racism is a 6.1. Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation's rating is almost 0.7 of a point higher, nearly a full point higher than what we see in our data set. This is a strong rating, and again, something to reflect on and be proud of. And I don't just bring this up because it's a question we asked in the survey. It came up in grantees' own open-ended comments as well. There's a sub-theme from grantees around the work that the foundation was doing to lead DEI and racial equity efforts within the community. The first grantee just appreciates the work that the foundation did around racial equity and COVID-19 response in the counties it serves. While a number of grantees also asked for the foundation to lean into this work even more. As this one grantee says, we would love more opportunities to network with prospective partners to find ways we can contribute to the movement toward robust racial equity. So let me pause here. We've talked about some ideas and aspects of impact and understanding, as well as the importance and role of diversity, equity, and inclusion to grantees. Any quick questions or reflections here? Anything that surprised you? Did you think the foundation would be in the top 5% of the data set for perceptions of impact?
I think we hoped that the foundation would be in the top 5%.
Certainly. Well, we'll get to some specific reflections and kind of action-oriented kind of ideas in a minute. But I just wanted to see any other ideas or questions here before we move on. All right. So let's now draw this idea and these perceptions of impact beyond just this community and diversity, equity, and inclusion and into grantees' own organizations. No surprise here, ratings continue to be stronger than what we typically see in our comparative data set, and the top 15%. Here too, grantees report that the foundation is aware of the challenges their organization is facing. Ratings in the top 20% of our comparative data set. So time and time again, we're seeing these exceptionally positive perceptions from our grantees. And as we're talking about organizational impact and perceptions of organizational impact, it's important to also reflect on the foundation's own grant-making characteristics. So the foundation gives less unrestricted support than what we typically see. The average grant length is about what we usually see, 2.5 years. And the grant size is much smaller than what we see at the average funder, though pretty in line with what we see at the custom cohort. So your grants are about the same length, a little smaller, and more restricted grants than what we usually see. And I bring this up because in our research and what we've found over the years at CEP is that large multi-year unrestricted support is often tied to stronger perceptions of organizational impact from grantees. If you think about it, it makes sense. Grantees are the ones on the ground doing the work. They're the ones who know how to best spend the money and allocate that money appropriately. And so those ideas of perceptions of impact increasing when that kind of combination of support is received makes sense to us from just a gut check logical standpoint as well. There's also another implication for some of this type of more unrestricted flexible grant making, and it's the implications it can have on streamlining aspects of a foundation's processes, which we'll talk about more in a minute. Of course, it's not just the support grant dollars that a foundation provides that leads to perceptions of impact, also that support beyond the grant. So about 45% of your grantees indicate receiving some sort of non-monetary support, some sort of assistance beyond the grant. And those 45%, 89% of them say that that support was a moderate or a major benefit to them. And that bears out in our analyses. So grantees who indicate that that support was a major benefit, they provide significantly more positive ratings on several measures throughout the report, including the foundation's understanding of their organizations. So grantees are gaining value out of the interactions that the foundation is facilitating with them through various supports beyond the grant check. Here are a few more quotes to illustrate these strong findings. TGKVF was the breakpoint in all the good ways. In just a few years, we have taken huge strides towards sustainability. While this other grantee talks about the foundation's work to build partnerships in the community. Any reflections or questions here before I pass it to Aaron to walk us through a few slides on relationships before I close us out on some ideas around processes and recommendations?
This is Georgette. I have a question.
Please, yeah.
When you were going through the different charts, and we've had wonderful results, the custom group, I'm sorry, could you re-explain the blue line? Because I saw a shift in the middle blue line. I want to make sure I understand that. I didn't hear as much conversation on how we benchmarked up on that.
Yeah, so that thin blue line in the middle of that tan bar is the median of that smaller group of funders that Stephanie and Candace and their team selected that more closely represent the community foundation. So what you can see on these two slides that I'm showing here, let's look at the bottom one, the awareness of challenges that an organization is facing. See, the median for the custom cohort is right about the 25th percentile of our overall data set. So there are more funders in that smaller custom cohort who are in the bottom quarter of our scale than what we see in our overall data set. Yeah, that's not the case for Greater Conroe Valley Foundation, right? It's in the top of the custom cohort and the top of the comparative data set as well.
I just wanted to make sure I was reading that correctly. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. That's a great question.
You know,
well,
this
Aaron,
one,
go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, this is Thomas. This one comment. You know, in the comments themselves, it's really great to see, I think, a lot of the vision that the board and the staff had coming out of the last strategic planning process, which was to be a more engaged change maker in the community itself, right? I mean, the foundation's been around for a long time, different leadership does different things, but coming out of that last strategic plan, you know, it was really about being more hands-on with grantees, really being out, creating change, not just grant making, using all the tools of the foundation. So when I see things like, you know, they're real change makers, they've helped to build our capacity, they've connected us to other partners, they're aware of our issues. What it says to me is that your staff is out there on the ground in connection with grantees, really creating change hand in hand with folks. It's pretty exciting to see that, because that was really the vision, I think, coming out of the last plan, of using all of those tools, including being a hands-on change maker. So it's pretty neat comments to see for me as an outsider.
Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, and it was great even for us to read. not as involved with the foundation. It's great to see when grantees are really having such consistently positive perceptions of the foundation's work in the community. Erin, all right, if I pass it to you to take us through a few slides on relationships.
Yes, thank you, Hayden. We will now move on to the overwhelmingly strong perceptions of the foundation's relationships with grantees. And when we say relationships in our survey, we're not asking grantees if they're happy or satisfied. When we talk about strong relationships, we mean the quality of interactions and communications between a funder and its grantees. And our research shows very clearly that strong relationships are very powerful predictors of grantee ratings, particularly the way they see their funder having impact on their organizations and communities. And this dynamic certainly plays out in your GPR results. We will start by looking at some measures related to interactions with foundation staff. We asked grantees how responsive the Greater Conemaugh Valley Foundation staff is, and grantees' ratings place the foundation in the top 10% of funders in our overall data set and at the very top of its custom cohort that Stephanie and her team selected. And grantee perceptions of the staff's approachability are in the top 5% of CEP's data set. As we see here in the second chart, how grantees responded to the question of how comfortable they are approaching the foundation if a problem arises. And now we'll just take a step back from specific personal interactions and look at the way the foundation as a whole is viewed for its communication with grantees. Grantees hold very strong perceptions of the clarity of the foundation's communication of its goals and strategies, once again, providing ratings in the top 10% of our overall data set. And grantees also view the foundation as incredibly open to ideas about its strategy relative to other funders, and especially relative to its custom cohort, as we see again, very top of the custom cohort. And to close this section, we want to specifically highlight again some quotes that speak to the remarkable relationships that grantees have with foundation staff. This first grantee says, "I very much appreciate the interest our project officer has in expanding our program and sustainability. They say that they've provided helpful support and leadership without intervening in any daily operations." And the second grantee also praises the program officers and sheds some light on the valuable growth opportunities they've had as a result of their relationship with the foundation. They're writing that the program officers care deeply about making their organization stronger and helping them secure funding, and are always offering them opportunities to learn and grow. And we definitely want to note that, again, these are just a small sample of so many glowing comments that grantees had about their relationships with the foundation and the positive difference it's made for their work. And in terms of responding to this, we really just recommend working to identify and codify individual behaviors and practices that might be contributing to these strong perceptions of staff, of grantees' relationships with the foundation as a whole, just to ensure these continued successful relationships in the future. And I will pause here again in case anyone has any reflections or reactions that they want to share in response to this really positive set of findings.
Thanks, Erin. And while people think on this for a second, I don't know if you read it in the memo. There's a block quote that's at the bottom of the relationship section where one grantee says, "I am in love with my program officer." That is the first time in nearly 6 years of me doing this work that I've seen a comment that effusive. While a little hokey, I think speaks to the strong relationships that individual staff members are building with their grantees. Of course, not in a romantic way, but in the ways of support that they're providing.
Hayden, we joked among the program staff that if that was about any of our colleagues, we'd be a little jealous, but if it was about ourselves, we'd be a little uncomfortable. It was a very nice compliment.
I think that's a great way to put it. All right, well, let us move on to grantees' perceptions of the foundation's processes. Here, perceptions are a little bit more mixed. Some opportunities for improvement, particularly as we're thinking about the comparison to our overall data set, as well as grantees' own suggestions. So grantees find the foundation selection process helpful, more helpful than typical in the top 10% of our data set. And they find staff's involvement in that process valuable as well. So here we ask a custom question. So it's asked only of community foundation grantees around the draft stage of the application process and whether or not a program officer's feedback was helpful. Here, you see that almost every grantee is going to be providing a 7 on a 1 to 7 scale of strongly agreeing the assigned program officer's feedback was helpful in strengthening our application. This is a strong rating, and again, speaks to the value that staff are providing beyond the grant as grantees are working to work with the foundation. At the same moment, there may be an opportunity to more right-size the foundation's processes to the size of the grant that it's making. So if you recall, grantees on average on the median report a grant size of around $30,000. At the same time, over their lifetime of the grant, they're spending about 25 hours on Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation required processes. As a result, this creates a dollar return. So the median total grant dollars awarded per process hour required at the bottom end of our comparative data set. So in the bottom 20% of our comparative data set. This begins to indicate to us that there may be an opportunity to think about aspects of the process that are not particularly helpful for grantees or particularly helpful for staff or necessary for the foundation that could be streamlined in the future. And it's not just the quantitative ratings. So over half of grantees' suggestions, over 50%, mention opportunities to clarify, improve, and streamline aspects of the foundation's processes. This one grantee says the grant application reports aren't always a fit for our organization. They're thinking about how they need to fit into the foundation's priorities as opposed to a more flexible process that meets them where they are. Similarly, here are a few more quotes. I won't read them, but they are about opportunities to streamline various aspects of the foundation's process that either don't make sense to them, don't fit the specific context that they're working within, or just take too much time. As this one grantee says at the bottom, they are spending more time on the processes when they feel they should be out completing the funder's work. And I think that's the framework that I often think about process, which is there's obviously a need and a necessity for much of the foundation's process. At the same time, it needs to be balanced with the work that a grantee is funded to set out to do. And sometimes grantees can feel that the work that they're setting out to do isn't being completed because they are bogged down by an aspect of a funder's processes. That's an extreme example. I wouldn't really say that's on the whole the case for Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation, but it's a perspective to keep in mind as staff and you as a board are thinking about what aspects of the process are helpful and what aspects could be streamlined in the future. So any questions here or reactions here?
As to the processes, it would, and maybe it's in the data, be helpful to understand with a little more specificity what certain grantees find cumbersome or, in their view, unnecessary. I don't really know how to ask the question because I'm not sure if they're just bothered by the fact that we got to confirm a number of things as a community foundation for tax IRS purposes and for our own internal purposes to match the two up better if it can be matched up. But I don't know if you have that specificity.
Yeah, that's a great question. Aaron, why don't you jump in? I think a lot of the qualitative responses pinpointed different aspects of the process that may be opportunities to reflect on their necessity or to streamline.
Yes, definitely. We see this reflected in qualitative comments, and I will note that Stephanie and her team placed in some really helpful custom questions. One of them, which we did not show here, asked about the data collection and evaluation processes, and grantees seemed a little bit less enthusiastic about those. We asked them the extent to which they agreed to a series of statements about the logic model and the community wealth model. And we saw some less agreement and some disagreement with whether they understood those models, whether they were helpful to their work. And we did see that reflected in some comments where folks said there was some confusion around, what those models were for or whether they were relevant to their specific organization. And yeah, ultimately, I think we see that grantees were just sort of asking questions about, this piece of the reporting process. I'm not sure how it's relevant or how I'm supposed to complete it. It took me a long time. is there an opportunity to, have some of these supplemental deliverables removed? So those are the types of comments that we saw, and some of what we saw in the great custom questions that your team added to the survey.
Thank you.
Any other questions or reflections here before I close this out with some recommendations, and then we can open it up for more discussion and reflection. All right, let's move on to just a few points to think about that really capture both the tenor of the findings and potential next steps for you as a group. The first is, and there are two related recommendations here, and they're going to feel like cop-outs. They're going to feel like there's not much to go on here, but they're vitally important. The first is around reflecting on which aspects of the foundation's values, behaviors, and approaches have contributed to such strong perceptions of community impact and understanding. And I mean this, and this is similar to this third bullet, work to codify individual behaviors and practices that may be contributing to Grantee's strong perceptions of staff. These two interrelated recommendations are really important as the foundation continues to grow, as it continues to work on change its strategies, and of course, as staff inevitably shift in and out, to both name and work to continue the values and practices that are leading to such strong perceptions. I've talked to Michelle and Stephanie about this, really for folks to get in a room and name specific behaviors and practices and values that are leading to such strong perceptions. More tactically, if it aligns with the foundation's goals and its capacity, can't do everything here, is there an opportunity to build on the valuable non-monetary support that the foundation is already providing to grantees? Can even more of that assistance beyond the grant be provided to folks you're funding? And continue, as any funder should, to reflect on your grant-making characteristics and see if there's an opportunity to provide the foundation's most aligned grantees, not all grantees, with more flexible long-term funding, of course, within the restrictions that many community foundations have. And then finally, on aspects of the foundation's processes, identify and maintain, work to the most helpful aspects of the process, what is leading to those strong perceptions of the helpfulness of the selection process, while working at the same time to streamline aspects of the foundation's processes that grantees and/or staff, or you as a board member, may find time-consuming and not particularly helpful. So what is necessary, what is helpful, and then anything that falls outside of those boxes, do you need it, or can it be removed from the process? So these are our recommendations. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and open this up for broader conversation. And Thomas, I don't know if there's any facilitation you would like to add around the Google Doc as well. Oh, Thomas, you're on mute.
I think just open it up for discussion and reactions to what you just heard, for some deeper dives with any of the folks at the center there. And then please do put your reflections, your analysis of what you just heard into the doc. What areas do you need improvement? You can see there's some already in there. What big questions are coming up for you as you listen to some of this feedback? So comments and questions, reactions to some of the recommendations.
Well, I'd say that we have some incredible program officers, and I don't know where you could find better, and I don't know where you could find more, but if they're out there, I guess we ought to be chasing.
Well, Bob, this what stood out to me is the leadership. And again, I think this was something we talked a lot about in the last strategic planning process, about how does the foundation use all of its tools, and leadership, providing leadership, in the work was part of those tools. And you see those things when you hear things like, we've got great relationships. So many foundations, it looks kind of like this. I'm the foundation, I'm the grantee. I don't ever really interact truthfully with my foundation officer, right? what I'm hearing is that y'all are, I mean, you're still holding the money, so you still got a little power over, but you know, a lot closer to actually allowing people to ask hard questions, you know, and really have truthful conversations with you. I think that's, is getting more and more the way of foundations, but it used to be very rare. I think you saw several comments in here about just, you know, the foundation taking up its leadership on issues that you care about and things that are in the community. You know, helping people to work through the application process and answering questions and being flexible, being responsive, providing feedback and support to those grantees. So much of that is part of the change work that I think has really excelled since the last time we did the strategic planning process. So I would agree with a lot of the things that Hayden says. It'd be really great to capture, like, what does the leadership of the foundation really mean? What does it look like? And how do we continue to expand that part of the foundation's work? Because it's a super important piece. When y'all ask people to come together, they come together. When y'all speak, people listen. You know, you have a good following. And so there's a real opportunity, I think, there to continue to build on that piece.
Just thinking about these questions, I'm going to throw another one into the mix that you don't need to write about, but I'd just love to hear your reactions to. Is there anything here in the data that surprised you, that was unexpected, either in the positive or in the more constructive, that you would like to share or you'd like to ask questions about?
I think for me, I was happy to see that from our last strategic planning, where we really sort of moved into community building by trying to foster partnerships between other organizations. It seemed like there were a lot of positive comments from that. And it seems like from our last strategic planning, we've really managed to make a big impact in finding those organizations that can work together and make their communities stronger together. So I think that that's a great positive for us.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's something to be proud of. And I think you're starting to get at what are the specifics that are leading to those strong ratings. Some of the positive diagnosis almost of the actions that you can carry into the future that you want to be implemented or named into the next strategic plan, or even in a code of values if the foundation doesn't already have one, and the ways it interacts and engages with the community. I'm seeing a few comments on the Google Doc around the foundation's processes. Are there, for even you as board members, does the feedback from grantees feel right to you around aspects that are either unclear or confusing or could be streamlined? Or was this something that you really weren't expecting to hear?
This is Georgette. I think any application is intimidating. I don't care what it is. So, and having my, you know, I'm not the only one who's been on distribution, but not having the one to write it, but read it, it's intimidating. And I think even having samples out there of other blank ones might be helpful, but it's I think just any kind of application is an intimidating process for some, and myself included.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. I mean, also, your funding, the foundation is funding much smaller than typical organizations. So you're not funding many grantees who have an entire development office or their own grant writers. So it really is for some grantees, a program staff member who is also needing to apply and conduct various reporting functions. And so that's always something to keep in mind, which is what is the actual capacity of the nonprofits that we're applying to, and not a capacity, or who we're asking to apply, not even a capacity from a skill standpoint, but from just a time standpoint. What else are we asking them to do? What else do we need them to be doing? And what else would they like to be doing?
Yeah, this is Ted Armbrecht, and the risk of just repeating what others are saying. I really, first of all, I think that the numbers are fabulous. As Bob said, it really shines on our staff. I think that really shines through on this. As someone that's been working on the both from the grant committee, but also working with an organization right now who's been applying for funding and seeing how they're going through the process. I think that one bar you put up that shows the dollars per hour spent is really interesting. The guy that I'm familiar with, he's very intelligent. He's retired, so he has the time to kind of work on it. And I can see the burden that potentially is placed on organizations, like you said, where you're requiring a staff member to take time from the work at hand to really kind of jump through the hoops. So I think that is really this has been really enlightening in that regard, to see how we can really work to try and tighten that up, and while still getting the reporting that we need, as Charlie said, trying to really decipher what it is that is really important to us and what is potentially just adding more time and effort on the part of the grantee. But really informative numbers to look at.
Ted, this is Todd. I would echo that. My my experience on that side of things is a few years stale, but my wife was involved with a nonprofit that had grants through us, and particularly where that nonprofit had nothing but volunteers. It was a very frustrating process for them, a time-consuming process to do not only the grant application, the lengthy grant application, which I think, has a lot of good information that we need, but quarterly reports that were more than just, a few questions and data points. They were lengthy, and then there were technology issues about the type of machine you could use to submit them. But that might be out of date by now. But there was a lot of frustration with that, while there was a lot of appreciation for the foundation support. So I would just echo that same thing.
Just as an update, Todd, we did cut back on reporting. So just FYI. Instead of a report, we had like more of the program officers had conversations instead of, and those were every 6 months, right, Stephanie?
We still have an interim report for proactive grantees. I think program staff have some recommendations around that, but we have conversations now at the 3-month and the 9-month mark.
And I think we were, as staff, we have come to realize that our overall process can be simpler. So we are open to simplifying our application and our process to where it makes sense. So I think that part of the report was not too much of a surprise for us. We've come to realize that we need to be simpler.
So how do we move on and make our process simpler? Is that through a series of the Stephanie and everyone working with you to make this streamlined easier for grantees? Is it just taking their suggestions and making it easier?
Yeah, we were gonna, the program staff, they've already come up with a list of things that we can change. And then we'll have a kind of bring in some applicants that have received funding over the years and do like a little focus group with them. And then we'll have a recommendation for the board. So we'll look at things ourselves, have some changes, bring grantees and applicants in and ask them, what do you think about if we make this the process instead? And then we would have a recommendation for the board as a part of strategic planning.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it was Hayden's comment that we need to right size the process to the size of the grant. Is that correct? Although you also, I think, have to think of it from the grantee's perspective. They would love us even more if we always gave large, unrestricted grants with little application process and little reporting. So if you want those numbers to go to the top of the scale, that's all you got to do.
So very true.
I do like, though, that, you know, when you look back, when we had our last strategic meeting, however many years ago, and we were doing a lot of little mini grants and sort of spinning our wheels in a lot of areas, that it's nice to see now, this many years later, that we have been able to make some sort of a change in course. And if we're still on the lower end of the grant sizes, we've certainly upped that average, I would say, from where we were 5, 10 years ago.
And now we can actually renew 5 years or longer. So even though the typical applicant, the typical respondent in this case, I think it was 2.4 years, we are open for larger grants in our proactive area. So.
Well, and I think the wrap up on this, once, because I have all the faith that this is going to be rectified as we go through the process and as you all continue to move forward, is our Valley does have a long memory. So we're going to have to get the word out. And Michelle, you're very good at communication, but getting that word out that we've changed the process, I think is going to be critical once we're ready.
Absolutely. But I think overall, in the sector, Hayden, correct me if I'm wrong, people are moving towards larger, just like Bob said, larger unrestricted grants. It's kind of like a movement in our sector. So we'll have to see what that means for us. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly we're seeing more and more funders at least talk about it. I will say in our data set, the same proportion of funders who are providing large unrestricted grants is equal to what it was 10 years ago. So lots of people are talking about it. There's maybe not as much action towards it. So there's buy-in around the theory, but the implementation still leaves something to be desired.
This is Debbie Sink. I have a question. Is there a relationship between having restricted grants and the level of involvement of the staff in guiding and working with the beneficiaries of those grants?
That's a great question. So are you thinking about just like a programmatic grant to fund a childhood reading program 4 days a week? Is that, I think honestly, so just to take it back to staff interactions don't always create stronger perceptions, generate stronger perceptions from a grantee. So just because a staff member interacts more frequently or is hands-on with a grantee doesn't automatically translate to stronger perceptions in our data set. So when we're looking at frequency of interactions, the reason for that is because it's about the quality of that interaction. So is it pressure filled? Is the program officer communicating and understanding? So can you get time on the program officer's books, or is the program officer always coming to you? So is it top down? So really it's about the quality of some of the aspects of interactions what Aaron was sharing, and then how that foundation or how that program officer is demonstrating, fostering, and communicating and understanding of grantees' work. So I think for Commonwealth Valley Foundation, it's apparent that the program staff and program officers are hitting the right notes in terms of those interactions, but more frequent interactions doesn't equal more positive perceptions. Got about 3 minutes remaining. Michelle, Thomas, any closing remarks that y'all want to bring to us or anybody else want to share anything?
I'll just quickly prompt everybody to continue to put your analysis in the Google Doc there. The link is still in the chat if you haven't done so. There's some really great comments in there. And you can see how those comments are really going to continue to support our work in the retreat itself. So strengths, areas of improvements, big questions that are coming up for you. Please make sure you fill those out. You can do it after this meeting as well. And build on your own knowledge in addition to what you've just heard from Hayden. Build on your own knowledge. There's other things that goes on that list besides what you've heard today. So this is also the opportunity to get your input into the mix. So make sure you do this. This is part of that bigger SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats analysis that we're going to do. So.
Yeah, I
If
just
I
want
look,
to.
if I look at the Google Doc, it looks like it's already been filled out. Am I to find a blank one somewhere?
No, just keep adding to it. Actually, it's made to just keep it going. It'll take as much information as you can put in it. So just click it in either one of those, and you can continue to add to it. And if you see something you already admit to, you can put a plus beside it, or you can just put it again. We'll make sense out of all of it, before it comes back to the retreat itself.
And yeah, I just want to make sure that the board knows that we do have the best team in philanthropy. So Stephanie, you want to close us out with any closing remarks?
Oh gosh, well, just I second that, what Michelle said, and appreciate, all the program officers and Candace, our grants manager, keeps everything in line for us. And we have a whole team working behind the scenes. Sarah does a lot, all of us. So we appreciate y'all, and Hayden, thank you, and Thomas, and we'll get to work. Like Michelle said, we have a whole list of action items and recommendations, and want to work with you all on that.
Great.
Thank you
Thank
so
you all.
much. I really appreciate everyone's hard work.
Yes, thank you. That was really great presentation.
Of course. Well, if you have any additional questions, feel free to push them through Stephanie or Michelle, and we can follow up via email. So thank you all for taking the time, and I look forward to hearing how the strategic planning process goes.
And I do just want to say congratulations to the staff, because that was a really fantastic review.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
Great work.
Thank you all.
Great job, Michelle.
Great work.
Thanks, Hayden.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
Tom.
y'all. Bye
Thank
now.
you.